Good afternoon. Winterview back again with another brief dialogue for his dear friend, his dearest friend maybe, Annastacey. This brief dialogue, once again on the topic of liberation, enlightenment, is a return to a model of understanding that is more body-centered in its approach, more somatic, you could say, rather than a mental or cognitive / conceptual. This is a return to natural functioning, an advocacy, you might say, for a return to the body returning to its natural place in the order of the world. What do I mean by that? I don't know, actually. No, I do know. What I'm going to suggest is that which is called liberation, which is a recognition of the illusory nature of this personal self, puts the body back to its natural state, in a way. In other words, so-called normal functioning, where it's believed there's a person in that body, creates, or seems to at least create, a lot of fantasies and undue, unnecessary or needless conceptualizing around the life of the person that is imagined to live in the body or as the body. The human creature I like to think of as a clever monkey, a very clever monkey, and nothing more. I have received criticism for this, I will admit, but I think my rationale is in some ways sound, and that's the topic of this particular dialogue, this brief dialogue. The difficulty for conceptualizing a person in the body creates a second order of sort of neurotic effects, or can do at least for the person. A lot of stress about the path of this body. It starts a little bit like this. If it is perceived that the person exists as a separate individual apart from all other objects in the world, then there's a second order of effects that naturally takes place in the mind. First of all, or not necessarily in any particular order, just in the order that I can think of, if I'm separate, then I'm an agent of autonomy. I have the ability to direct my life in some manner. Therefore, if I can direct my life in some particular manner, what is the best direction for me personally? And then you could even say a third order of challenges, that if I am a separate person, then like the rest of the world that I see around me, what is my purpose? Everything I see around me seems to have its own particular purpose, its own reason for its being. The trees for oxygen, and the animals for food or companionship, the roads for cars, and on and on and on it goes. So I, being separate from all this, must in some ways have a purpose, a particular goal, an existential raison d'être, you might say, for this existence. And then, therefore, going back to the earlier point, if I can direct my life in some way, am I directing it in accordance with my divine purpose? Am I on the right track, so to speak? This is I think, a very muddled place for a person to end up. And it leads to a lot of wild mood swings. If I'm on my path, I feel good. If I'm off my path, I feel miserable. And we see this in the clinic with a lot of existential-based depression. Not that that necessarily leads to depression, but just saying. So that's a sort of second and third order of problems that might arise from that being separate. The main point, I guess, is that as an agent who can direct one's life, then inevitably the question will arise of what action should I take? What is best for me? And if we look at humanity across the board, in fact, just looking at media, we see this question played out over and over again. This behavior is good. This behavior not good. This behavior noble. This behavior ignoble. And so on. It's a real difficulty for the human to know and to feel that they are in some ways on track, on their way. To want to be on their way. And in fact, that brings us, you could say, to spirituality, which is seemingly the penultimate pathway for the human. They've tried, let's go stepwise, I guess, before we get to spirituality. They've tried things in the world to find their way. They have tried, let's say, the practical stuff. A big house, a nice house, lots of friends, a high prestige, high status employment, fat salary, lots of money, adulation, celebrity, being fashionable, being thin, being interesting. These are the things that the person thinks the person can do. Education, philosophy, being wise, and so on. Stuff in the world that will bring some sort of happiness and meaning and purpose to that person's life. And of course, for those humans listening to this, you'll know that often we find things that seem to entertain and occupy for a while, and indeed we report a positive mood as a result, and eventually it wanes, loses its interest, or we master it and we're bored of it and we need the next thing. And of course that inevitably must lead to some kind of metaphysical understanding. For those who have a sort of quite an astute intellect, you'll realize eventually that the world will never really offer that long-term satisfaction. And of course that will lead to metaphysical questions. What, say, more esoterically, metaphysically, might I do to improve my lot in life? The first dabblings for many with a sort of more metaphysical understanding might be positive thinking, to imagine one's future as bright and fantastic, to work on one's self, to work on the personality, say, as something that can be shaped into a better personality, to rid oneself of negative or limiting beliefs, to go through a therapeutic process of sorts, to undo past patterns of negativity and try and focus on positivity. These are usually the first dabblings, and we see that this is reflected in the bookshops around the world, with the quite large, these days especially, self-help sections, where it used to be a couple of shelves. It can now be an entire bookstore on the subject. And for those who are a little bit more courageous, they tend to see through the self-help stuff and find themselves drifting into things like meditation, mindfulness, practices that in some ways detach or separate, sit above the world. See the world as separate from yourself in some ways. Let the world be as it is. And these can be quite relaxing, quite settling to the mind. And I recommend it still, even in my service where I work, as stress relief practices. But again, they're ultimately not satisfying. They won't take you there. And then for those rare few, they stumble across this idea of enlightenment or union with God, union with the divine, depending on your leanings. Not many these days are so keen on the divine. Not many are keen on God and that type of thing, because seemingly God is very out of favour in the popular culture these days in the West. But the divine, whatever that means, is a little bit more palatable. Divine energy, supreme intelligence, divine intelligence, all that sort of stuff is a little bit more palatable. But in some ways, it seems to suggest an energy separate from oneself that one can discover or earn favour from or merge into by some process. And that represents pretty much the end of the line for what we might call endeavour to get a positive outcome for oneself. And the whole time, all of that sort of stuff is for the person. It's for this imagined person who lacks it, who has limitation. And so they seem reasonable. Why wouldn't a person, an intelligent person, try to engage in those types of activities? And you could even argue that we see the same type of intelligence take the form of gross behaviours that, although on the surface seem destructive, in their core could have been a very primitive or childlike attempt to feel better. And these, I'm talking about drug and alcohol abuse and other sort of so-called negative lifestyle choices that you would wonder why people would do. But if you pare them down, you might see that the original intent was to feel good, to feel better about oneself, or to cope with the feelings of failure at not finding one's life's meaning or purpose, and so on. So you could in fact see the whole gamut as one giant striving for personal endeavour. But the whole thing is too that you might notice that the mind, or the attention at least, is very focused on the body as the source of me, the source of the person. It's hard for the mind to get off that track, you might say. People, when they ask questions about liberation and enlightenment, will often ask earnest questions about meditation, diet. What can I do? As in, like, what can the body do? Where can the body go? Can I take the body to a sacred place? Can I put the body in a sacred position? Can I sit the body with a sacred master? Can this mind of this body understand something about the beliefs of this body that it's not understanding to feel better? Very bodily centered. We're not asking about the clouds and the sky. We're not asking about the birds, the bees, the trees. We're just not asking those questions. It's all body centered, as if the body is the center of the universe still. Very hard to get off. So that is, going back to the start of this dialogue, the original point was to restore the body to its natural functioning. And the restoration is when the imagined self is seen through, when it's suddenly seen that there is no independent self, then all those fantasies collapse. They fall over completely. And what happens typically, not necessarily, but typically, is that the functioning of the body is in some ways restored to that which it always was, but was never seen. And the body is the human creature is little more than a clever monkey, a very clever monkey. And as a very clever monkey, we can now look at this human creature with a greater sense of clarity or reality even. And we know a lot. We're very clever. We've figured out a lot about mammals and the behavior of mammals. And we know that our brain is very different from other creatures. Or, slip of the tongue there, we know that the brain of the human is very different from other creatures. And so with that understanding, we can start to make a realistic formulation and appraisal of the human creature. We know, for example, as a primate, as a monkey, that the human creature is social in nature, largely social. And being a mammal, it has a rather evolved emotional system. It has a wide range of feelings and emotional responses that we believe, at least at the moment, that are a part of the normal social creature's repertoire. To be social, one must in some ways recognize one's own feelings and the feelings of others. That helps with the social process. We know that there's a more base functioning going on with the human, more akin to reptilian or dinosaur kind of features, such as the basic functioning: sex, breathing, heartbeat, respiration, the basic bodily functions that are not in anyone's control, seemingly, like those real sympathetic nervous system stuff, all the basic functioning of the human, metabolism and so forth. And then we know that the big old cortex and frontal cortex especially, which are very advanced in the human monkey, create all sorts of very clever abilities to abstract, problem solve, and so forth. The human creature, when left to problem solve for its basics, is very clever and very ingenious. And we don't really have to talk about that, that's pretty obvious. But gets itself into an awful muddle when the model of the person is present. If the model of the person is believed in, then, as we were talking about earlier, it was all that superfluous functioning, the path of one's life, the goals, the specialness of the human, the sacredness of one's journey, all that sort of stuff is believed in fully. And that's in many ways one of the difficulties with non-duality and liberation, is the loss of all that amazing stuff you'd hoped for the person is lost in enlightenment. It goes away. It seems like an awful loss to bear. And the questions are often, in some ways, full of hope that'll stay. Like, when I'm enlightened, won't I... Will I be united with God? Will I finally realize my true calling in this world? And all of those very personalized ways of thinking, they're all killed, stone cold, dead at the moment of realization, because it's realized there never was a person. So all that personalized stuff was erroneous. And so, getting back to the human monkey then is not beheld as anything more than it really is, a human monkey. It is born, it will live a lifespan, it will more or less engage in the behaviors of a whole combination of stuff. It will be a product of its intelligence, it'll be a product of its upbringing and the experiences it has in its childhood especially. It'll be a product of difficulty, especially traumatic and unpleasant events will shape its behavior. It will become conditioned into the cultural, social, familial, interpersonal norms of where it lives, the dietary customs, the dress, the broader cultural norms and so forth, not particularly magical, just a learning process for the human monkey. It will become creative. It will solve problems with remarkable cleverness, practical problems especially. And it will go through the lifespan common to most mammals. It will probably partner up at some point with a member of the opposite sex, have children, as in procreate, have families, go through the normal difficulties of raising a family in the culture that it lives, have the triumphs that are normal to that culture as well. And so it's not special anymore. The human monkey, although remarkable, is no more remarkable, say, than any other living creature in the appearance. Everything is remarkable in that way. And so the grief, you could say, is for the ego, maybe. The ego that has high hopes and dreams of grandeur for the self will die at the moment of enlightenment. There can be a sense of grief and loss, in fact, I've heard reported at the moment of liberation, where it's realized that that's all given up, or even just prior to so-called liberation, the understanding that this will all be lost. It's a very sad realization too, that it was believed in, all these magical things for the person were believed in wholeheartedly. But with the restoration of functioning of the body, often comes a harmonizing of the mind as well. And what I mean by that, this might be getting a little esoteric and a bit kooky, but when the person is believed in as a thing, as an entity, and which includes all those magical fantasies about the specialness of the person, what often happens is that the mind is doing a constant feedback monitoring process of how the person is now and how life is unfolding now, and they're never quite in harmony. There's always this dissatisfaction that I believe let's choose a really simple example. I believe that I'm destined for a great life where I'm going to be famous and worshipped in some ways. Yet when I look around the world, at this body at least, it's quite mundane, it's quite ordinary, it's not living out its destiny. And that leads to a constant source of sadness and, you might say, even depression for people. This constant, unrelenting appraisal of how I fantasize myself and how life is. In the restoration of the human monkey as a natural creature without a person inside it, there's no more comparison, or there's little need for it going on constantly. The world just is as it is, and that's enough. That's enough. It's seen as enough without the person and without all those magical fantasies, believe it or not. So the final word is to say really about this human monkey that it only has two core tasks, and maybe I'll do a dialogue on these two core tasks. The two core tasks are at the end of the day to acquire the resources the human monkey needs and to make use of them / hold on to them for as long as is necessary before letting them go. Failure to acquire the resources leads to problems for that human monkey, and failure to make use of or hold on to and defend resources that it's acquired similarly leads to problems. I think I should spend a bit of time in my next brief dialogue talking about that. Anyway, that is it for this brief dialogue. I hope all you human monkeys out there are doing well. And here's a little philosophical question to put you to sleep tonight. A little Zen koan. No, not a Zen koan, just a philosophical conundrum. It's a quality of consciousness, is it not? That aware awakeness. It's not a quality of the human monkey, however. Therefore, Human monkeys will never hear this message. Isn't that interesting? And you won't hear this message. So what will hear this message? Once again, comments are welcome. Thank you.